But I know Matthew Toulmain won't go over his 15 minutes. But in that 15 minutes, Matthew, who's the principal consultant and joint owner of RM Consulting Group, which is a firm which provides advice in the management of land and water, reclaimed water, farm businesses and natural resource management. They've worked with communities, they're based in the communities down here in southern New South Wales and northern Vic for over 25 years. Matthew was the principal consultant in both of the independent reports into the basin impacts in the GMID and the New South Wales Murray Valley. Matthew, we'd love to hear from you now.
Thanks, Tom. Well, Thomas, good morning. Very nice to be here, and thank you for inviting me, Shelley. Very pleased to have the opportunity to come and share some of the thinking we've done with you guys. I think the words are "food grows where water flows" is the title, and I think that's really the most important. That's where we need to start. And the challenge which we feel is that, so RMCG, we're based in Bendigo. We've been working with communities across regional Northern Victoria and Southern New South Wales for 25 years. Rob Rendell, who set up the business, comes from a sunflower growing property at Kerrang. Probably some of you played footy against him, and he's pretty rough. And we have a continuity of commitment to working with regional communities and helping empower regional communities. So I just made a quick list. So there's what are the agencies involved in water politics? The MDBA, Department of Agriculture and Water Resources, DPI, DELP, see some friends from Melbourne here in the audience today. The ACCC does prices, the Bureau of Meteorology is involved. There's a very significant risk that the decisions that are important every day to you guys are being taken by other people who've got often very good incentives, but are not involved in the decisions at the ground level. And the commitment we've made as a business is that we work with communities, we're embedded in communities, and we want to provide you and your communities and your representatives with the information to help you participate fully in that decision making. So that's a bit of a spiel, but that's where we come from. So I've had the pleasure of working with David McKenzie from the GMID Water Leadership Forum and Shelley and other colleagues from the Murray Group to help do some research to say, well, what's the information that's available about the impact of the Basin Plan? So the Basin Plan is too important to be something that is, as a process, is undertaken solely in Canberra and in Sydney and in Melbourne. And communities were anxious, that they felt that they had concerns, but they felt the data they had, the information they had, wasn't always available in a form that they could use and that they could work with so that they could be effective participants. So this is the exercise which we've involved in now. How do I go forward? Really or do you do it for me? So, some very simple numbers. As we all know, the Southern Murray Darling, so the overall Basin Plan is saying we want to recover 2750, although there's maybe a discussion that number may go up, but let's start with that. That's where we are at the moment, assuming we get the 650 GL offsets. It's not as big as that. The target for the Southern Murray Darling Basin is 2289, and as of November 2017, 1,723 gigalitres had been, I'm not sure what the verb is, transferred, moved from the consumptive pool to the non-consumptive pool. And of that, 451 gigalitres had come from the New South Wales Murray, and 350 gigalitres high security had come from the GMID. Now, we can talk about long-term average annual yields, but I think these are the numbers that people understand. 451 gigalitres from New South Wales Murray and 350 from the GMID. The figures may be a few months out of date, but it gives you a sense of the scale. Next, please. So, when I was young, my mother used to make me wear pullovers like this, so this is what this is. What this is showing us, do you have a pointer? I should have done my homework. Not to worry. What these is showing you is some time periods, 1970, 1980, 2000, first drought 2003, second drought, millennium drought 6-7, and then we've got here at the right-hand end an average of the water usage across the Southern Murray-Darling Basin as a whole, 2013 to 16. And there are some important messages. The first one is, let's look at the totals. 2001, up around nearly 7,000 gigalitres. We're now talking about 2013-14 average, about 4,200. So that's the first message. We've had a step change in the total volume available for irrigation. Undeniable. And it doesn't matter where it comes from, what we're saying is there's been a step change in the water available for irrigation. The second message is looking at the way that impacts different sectors, because I think that's one of the other important messages. So look at the light bluey colour at the bottom. Horticulture, hardly shifted year on year, drought, flood, average. All that's happened is we've seen an inexorable growth in horticulture. I don't want anyone to think I'm bagging horticulture. It's just a fact of life. And as we go forward, it's likely that horticulture will take a larger percentage of the available water. What is significant and what's evident is that in bad years, rice really suffers. And I don't need to tell anyone from Denny about the pain that's been suffered, not only in rice growers, but also in the rice mill, and the trucking businesses, and the warehousing, and all the support services that go with it. So that's the rice is this purple colour. So in the millennium drought, hardly anything. And we've seen a recovery, but we've seen a recovery to a lot less than where we were in 2001-2. Next slide, please. So we've done these two studies, one in the GMID and one in New South Wales Murray. And in our judgment, those are the two areas that are the most vulnerable and have contributed the most in terms of the impact of the Basin Plan. If you're in the Murrumbidgee, or if you're in Sunraysia, or if you're in the Riverland, you know, the impact has been much less. So the simple headline figures which we worked through are to say New South Wales lost 450 gigalitres of general security. The modelling we've done suggests that that means that if we had had that water in production, you'd have had $120 million worth of irrigated production that is no longer being produced in the New South Wales Murray region. And that's equivalent to and has the impact of 470 jobs lost that previously were dependent on irrigated production. So that's the figure for New South Wales. And the equivalent figure for GMID was, and these figures are now maybe 18 months old, so that may have shifted a little bit, but the broad figures are still correct. We're talking about 350 gigalitres transferred out of production, equivalent to $225 million worth of irrigated production, mainly in dairy, in the case of the GMID, and with 500 jobs lost in irrigation. So these are significant figures in terms of water use, and significant figures in terms of the regional economy. Next, please. I then just have two simple slides which show over the years the total volume of production. Because that's really, when we talk about it, that's what we're concerned about. How much rice is grown, how much rice is produced, how much dairy is produced. So this shows you rice production over the period from 1970, with a growth over the years up to 2001. We then have the first drought, and then the terrible millennium drought with hardly any production. And we've seen restored production, but at a level that has a step down from where we were before. Now, obviously, there's a whole range of factors that influence how much rice is produced. There's been some movement into cotton, particularly in the Murrumbidgee. There's been some readjustment. The drought hit hard. I think there's a lot of, I'm 65 and I'm certainly looking to retire at some stage. I think there's a lot of people who said, God, life is just difficult. And I think there's been a lot of adjustment, and I think people have gone into an easier production. But the simple message is, if you lose 400 gigalitres of water out of a community, you've seen a step down in production. And this graph, I think, tells that story. Next slide. And this is the same picture, but for dairy in the GMID, where again, we can see there was a peak, if my eyesight's not so bad, in 2001, and then we've come back down to a new level, which is significantly below where it was. Again, I'm not saying there are some other factors, but I think we're all clear. If you take a large lift of water out of production, then you're going to see these direct impacts. So, there's two other things I'd quite like to mention. Firstly, water markets. Water markets have been fantastic. They've given the chance of people to change their business, to adjust, to move water from one business to another, to move from a lower value to a higher value. But they are powerful tools that sometimes it feels like you're on a surfboard with a wave driving you into the beach, and sometimes you take a tumble. And there are some really important things that the basin plan are combined with trade we have to be aware of. Firstly, taking 2750 out of the consumptive pool means there's a smaller volume in the market. If you have a smaller market with the same demand, you get prices going up. And we've got the graphs to prove that. So one of the impacts of taking water out of production is that the average price of water, particularly in dry seasons, means that the ordinary dairy farmer, the ordinary rice farmer, is paying $50 to $100 a megalitre more in the temporary market than they would have done otherwise. So that's one direct impact. Secondly, GMID and New South Wales Murray irrigation, are more impacted for a number of reasons. And it's one of the areas where we have a debate with the MDBA. They say, but look where the water's been taken away from. Who's sold their water? Well, we just know too many cases where people in South Australia have sold water. All good for them. They've sold water to the government, and then they've backfilled. They've sold it at a premium, and they then bought the water back out of the GMID or out of Murray irrigation. And I think that hasn't been adequately recognised. So that the story is not where the water was bought from, it's what is the current water use in the areas where it was previously used. And the irrigation districts are then at risk because the total aggregate volume available through the systems is not as large as it was. So that we talk in GMID, we say that originally they used to have about 3,000 gigalitres a year. They're now operating at about 1,500. So almost halved GMID. My figures for MIL aren't as on my head, but there's a real risk about the viability of irrigation districts when you take that amount of water out. The second thing is that now, historically in the Murray Valley, the amount of rice grown was dependent on the allocation. And in years of high allocation, a lot of rice was grown. Years of low allocation, less rice was grown. We all understand that. But now with the water market, because the price is so high, if you get an allocation below 30%, the price goes above $150 a megalitre, people are incentivised to sell rather than to grow. And you see a level of rice grown comes to a point and then it drops off a cliff. And that's a really important change that is partly a function of the basin plan. Next. So we did a study in two parts. The first part I referred to, if you take water out, what does it mean in terms of irrigated production? So that was a really important first step. Second stage then is to say, however, irrigated production exists in a regional economy. So what does that change in irrigated production mean for the rice mill, the dairy processing plant, but the haulage, and then for the accommodation, and the motel, and the shop, and the supermarket, and everybody else around the regional chain? And so we did some modelling, which the simple messages are, absolutely, very significant second round effects. So we're saying that in New South Wales Murray, as well as the irrigation loss, there's been 77 million a year lost in regional businesses, with another 200 jobs lost, which is directly attributable to the reduction in irrigated production from the basin plan. Secondly, in GMID, $360 million of regional production reduced because the water is being taken out of the consumptive pool. And that equates to 500 jobs lost in the regional economy. Now, it is clearly the case that the basin plan has also led to very significant investment in the region, in investment modernisation, $2 billion in due course in the GMID, and very significant investment in Murray irrigation through the PIOPS programme. Secondly, many individual farm businesses have had investment in farm water use efficiency. We accept that and acknowledge that. But these very significant wider impacts impact on the regional community as a whole. Individual farmers may have benefited, but in most cases the regional economy has actually carried much of the burden. So the last slide, am I all right in terms of time? So the MDBA produced earlier this year some regional community profiles, which was their assessment of how local communities had been impacted over the period from the 2001 ABS census to the 2016. And I've just shown you here, this is, I could do you 27 slides. What this one is showing is, these are towns along the bottom: Berrigan, Collyambley, Denny, Hay, Loxton, Pyramid Hill, Rochester, Tatura, Wacool, West Berwick, and then in the green ones, they picked 3 or 4 communities which were not in irrigation communities, and that's Benalla. Mildura is obviously an irrigation community, but then Temora and Wedin, if I got the pronunciation right. Good enough. So I think, what this is showing is this is the percentage loss of total jobs over that period from 2001 to 2016. And these are very significant. I mean, I don't think any of us would be surprised. Wacool, over 40%. Berrigan, over 40%. Denny would have been close to 40, except that actually over that period, the rice mill was closed and is then opened again. And so actually there's been this offset because they closed the mill in Collie, they shut down the mill somewhere else. So the effect if you just looked at irrigated ag in Denny, you'd have had it up to 40%. So these are I think these are powerful figures that give reassurance to us that our concerns about the impacts we believe are real, are justified in terms of the figures at levels of total jobs. Now, clearly there's a range of factors that influence jobs and job production and job creation. Agriculture is not a static industry. People talk about agriculture as if it's an easy business. It's a very dynamic business with a lot of change. But these are very significant changes which impact on agriculture in the region and on the wider regional economy. So this is an indication of the data that we produced for the GMID and for the Murray Group. I think the challenge for today and the challenge for all of us then is to say, okay, if this is the data we have, then what are the decisions we take? And that's really the next stage, and that's what I'm looking forward to the discussion for the rest of the day.